Let's start with track C. So I will not be formal like Miloš on track A, so let's just start. Zoran, take the stage.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Zoran Horvat. I will talk to you today about the ways in which I write code. I write my code. So how do you write code? Do you write code one line at a time? Obviously, yes. But what does that one line do? Does it do something? Is it a complete feature? Or does it need another dozen of lines of code to just compile and do something, whatever? That is the difference between coding styles, and I will show you one style in which every line of code is meaningful, every line of code is a feature, and once you write it, it remains. You don't have to change it anymore. So, the rest of this demonstration will be code. Do you all see this font size? There will be a recording. I'm recording the screen, so you will be able to see it better later if you don't see everything. Do not think too much about code. This is C#. You don't have to know C#. You have to know programming. Any program. The point of this demo is in the process, not in particular language or particular application. This application is a console application. It will download, exchange rates, and exchange some money and show us the result of changing currencies. That is the demonstration. So we have a requirement to download exchange rates from the web server, which is running right now. I have it. And to convert some money. I want to show conversions for the last 7 days for the amount of $12.6, if I remember well. So that is the customer's requirement. How do we implement that? The point, whenever you have a customer requirement, the point is to focus on what you have heard, what you were asked to do. So you want to display. You don't have to read these gray letters. Those are just for me, because I sometimes don't know what I need to tell. Those are the reminders. Try not to see them. So the point is, when you have a single requirement, you always have a single requirement, no matter how big that requirement is, how large. It might be 80 pages of text, but it is still one requirement. You always have one immediate step into that requirement. So the requirement is to display report that comes out from currency exchanges something. So, display report. This says right line, a report. Now, if you see really, if your site is really, really good, then you will be able to follow this. Even at 200% zoom, it is tiny. One error in one file. Now, try to see that. From time to time, I might tell you what this corner icon says. When I write code, I always have one compile time error, two compile times error in one file, in two files, never more than that. And I always just fix that compile error, and I have a complete application. Whenever this application goes green, do you see it? Yes, there's half of it here. If you see green here, my application works, and it works correctly with no bugs. So the report, I need a report. What is the report? Another line of code. It is something that comes out of formatting, because I want to write it on the console window. It is something that is formatted. No arguments. I still have nothing to tell this function, but I know that it must be the result of formatting. So let's define this function. Format a report for me, and it says conversions report. I have no idea what you want me to format, So I will just tell you there is something. In the next iteration, there will be some data to be formatted. Right now, I don't care. I just want to have a placeholder. So the icon is green. Yes, it is. And if I run the application, it will really display this report. Do you find this funny? Do you find this ridiculous? Is this useful? How many of you think that this is not useful? One. Okay. So, maybe the problem is with you. Let me tell you why this is useful. I will not have to change anything out of here, among these lines of code, except the latest two lines. This one, which is calling the feature, and this one, which is implementing the feature. Everything else is done forever. So this level of abstraction is over. I'm stepping one layer deeper in the request, in the user's request, and now I'm thinking about that, about reporting what, I don't have data, and about formatting the view how. Those are two elements that I will need to fix later, to implement later, but I will not change any infrastructure around it. So, let's go with that. Another one line of code. Report of what? Of some conversions. Now, observe this thing, this event that will happen. I will say, format a sequence of conversions. Now, this is in red color because I don't have anything named conversion in my project. Now I have it. I have the name for a conversion, for a domain model named conversion. So the domain is emerging, and I didn't have to make it up. I didn't have to think, didn't have to design any classes. I just have a need. I need conversion to format a report. Good, a conversion class. An empty class. Don't be ashamed of empty classes. Don't be ashamed of empty interfaces, of empty functions, functions returning a fixed string. You don't have to be ashamed of that because you have a placeholder for future implementation. I have no idea what is going to fit in here. I don't want to think upfront. I don't want to design anything because I still don't need anything here. I only need a name, conversion. And now, what conversions will I display? Look, where it is. An empty sequence of conversions. So I don't have a data source. I don't have a content of any object, but I know that these objects will have to exist at some point later. So am I writing code one line at a time? Is every line doing something? Is every line doing something which I'm not going to change later until the moment comes to fully implement that particular line of code? So I only have a couple of wires, naked wires, going out of my domain of my model, entire model. And as time progresses, I'm closing one by one, and I'm completing the feature. When I complete part of the design, like this one line of code, it will be complete forever. No matter how many new requirements arrive, this line is not going to change. I will always display a report, for example. Okay, the next line of code. How can we format conversions? Okay, one idea is to format each conversion as one line which will be displayed on the console window. Okay, so I need another format report function which receives a single conversion. Another design element has emerged. And another single line of code which is doing something. And every single conversion report will have to be glued using new line, joined together, so I want to have a block of text. One line is one conversion. Done. One line of code again. And entire reporting, entire view is done. And I will not change it in the future. I will not change it because the request was to format lines of reports, one line per conversion. So I'm going to focus on this line of code in the future, not on this one. This one is done. So basically, we could even, I could show you the completed application. There's nothing more in this. You have got the whole idea. The idea is to push the design in microscopic increments so that every increment is doing one tiny microscopic layer of requirements, and it is completely implementing them. There's nothing left in that. Once you do that, you will have the names of collaborating classes, you will have dependencies, you will have everything you need, infrastructure, whatever, done. I mean, named, and then you will go into that part of code and work there, not here anymore. That is the point. So I'm going to increase the speed a bit. At this point, I have two things missing. One is, what are the data? The other one is how to report a single element. And now I'm branching. I need to choose which feature to implement next. And there you have a rule of thumb. Implement the easiest first. And you will see why that is smart. The easiest part here is to format a single conversion object into a string, which can be displayed on the view. So, what do I want to display? Of course, it's not the question, what do I want? What does the customer want? The customer says, I want to see the date of the conversion. So I say, all right, when did the conversion happen? Which immediately tells me that the conversion class now has to expose a public property getter on, which is a Datetime. Good. Now the compiler is warning me that on is never set. So let's set it for the constructor. It is injected through the constructor. And now you suddenly see the design is emerging in a way with which I cannot interfere. I cannot tell what this class is going to do. It must do the single thing that compiles. Basically, I rarely think in programming. And you know, my personal mission in life is to make programming boring. If things start to happen around, I'm sure that something is not working. You know, when everybody is quiet and write code, I know that everything is all right. So they must be bored. Okay. Why choosing the simplest feature first? Because as you progress with the simplest feature, you will gain information which you will use in more complex ones. So if you have the feeling that you should strike at the most difficult part right away, and then deal with those simple stuff around, then you will have the hardest part of work on your back right now. You don't want to have that. Do everything around, all the dependencies, fix them in a way which is the only way that compiles, and you will gain a lot of information which will help you when you start writing a complicated feature. You will have properties, you will have functions which are already in place, and they are in place because they must be there. Otherwise, my code wouldn't compile. And once you have them, then you attach to them and do the rest of the work. That will save you a redesign later. Okay, so the customer says, all right, I have a conversion date. I want to know from what amount that came. So what is this from? So I think, and it is the amount of money. Money is an amount and a currency. So there will be a concept of money. And you see, another class has just got its name. let me initialize it, and let me define another empty class, money. So I have 2 domain classes already, and I didn't have to design anything. Compiler told me that I have to have them. Customer wants to have to see what was the result of the conversion, so there must be another money amount. 2, I will initialize it, and this conversion class is about done. I think that nothing else will be installed here. Not sure. Okay, so now you see how the design is emerging on its own. I have no role here. I'm a typewriter. You know, I'm just typing the code in the only way in which this code can exist and be correct. So let's think about that other feature which is hard. Now I don't have data. You see, when you implement the design, you have 2 views on any requirement. Horizontal view, so a request consists of many related simple things which you can stack horizontally. And horizontally because all of them would be visible from the API, for example, from UI, something. So these 3 elements of the conversion are horizontal elements. And then you have the vertical view, when you have to pass the entire feature through all the layers, all until the infrastructure, to the database or network connection or whatever. So now I'm going vertically. And that is also an interesting hint. You can complete one tiny requirement horizontally and only then go vertically, because once you complete a horizontal pass through the UI layer or API layer, whatever, then you will know what elements need to be passed down all the way to the database. So I want to format the data, but I have no idea what the data are. Still an empty collection, but I have given it a name. Now look at this blank line. It shows you a distinction, a line, a boundary between fetching the data and displaying the view. So I have some separation. Even though this is the console application, I still have a separation between infrastructural operations and those regarding the view. So I want to fetch the data, but I know that my data are somewhere on the internet. And I don't want to connect to the internet here. I want an intermediary. I want to have a domain entity which is called a request. I know that there will be some work to do about fetching those exchange rates, so I'm just going to call it a request. Another element has got its name. And another empty class. We shall see what this request is going to do. It is going to know the range, because the requirement is to display exchanges for the last 7 days, okay? So there will be start and end date. I'm listening to what customer wants, and I'm constructing the elements of the design exactly that way. Now, if you ever watched anything I had to say about design patterns and design in general, this is the place where you do not insert design patterns. If you do that at this stage, you will make many mistakes. Many mistakes, painful mistakes. Because design patterns are meant to decouple elements of the design. But what elements? You have to know which elements you are decoupling. If you have 5 classes, 5 objects connected to each other, which ones do you want to be separate, independent from the others? You can probably choose several design patterns which are viewing the same 5 objects in different ways. If you fix that axis around which your design is free to move, and later on your customer comes and asks for a different change which does not rotate around that axis but this one, then you will understand that you cannot implement that requirement. You have to break the design and do it all over again so that it is flexible around the real need of your customer. So wait for the customer to tell what she needs and then inject decoupling in the right spot. So this requirement was fixed, starting and ending date. What is the starting date? That is the ending date minus 6 days, all right? That's precisely what I was told. And the end date is today. So I will have the range of the last 7 days. Good. Which means that I will have to have those here. I'm speeding up because you have already got the grasp of the whole process. Then I want to convert some amount of money, and that will be, I told you, $12.6. Now, I know what is 12.6. That is a decimal number. That was easy. But what is a dollar? So again, I have another design element popping up, and I just have to give it a name. A dollar is a currency with this symbol. So another class, the third domain class already, or the fourth one. This is the currency, and the money is still empty. Do you like this way of writing code? Half of you is already ready to fall asleep, I think. So this is boring, really, and I start to hate programming. And I will tell you, I had 3 bugs preparing this demo. And maybe we can play a game, start thinking where I made mistakes. And I will give you a hint later. Money, okay, speeding up again. I know that there is an amount, I know that there is currency. That is obviously right now because above I have initialized this money amount, so all the design elements are obvious already. And the customer says, I want to convert this amount for the last 7 days into euros, pounds, British pounds, and Swiss francs. All right. So this is what the customer says. The request is, now observe the design, the request was to convert between these days this amount into these currencies. I'm writing code which reads exactly the same as the customer's requirements, because that is what I was asked to write. I'm not constructing the builder, something, I don't know, this much code to explain all the ways the customer might ask me for something. No, this is what the customer is asking me to do. And I'm doing precisely that. Once customer arrives with an idea, not between dates, but I don't know, the average of a month or opening and ending of a month or things like that, you know, customers come with quite different sentences next time. And you say, all right, I can do that, but what was about those last 7 days? Oh, I worked last 7 days sometimes. That is what the customer will say. The customer will extend the requirements. Then you will come with the exchange request builder, which can drive you one way or the other, you know, and end up in a single exchange request object, on which you will just do what I'm about to do. Let me define those currencies first. So I have these 3 targets. That was very simply. Now I have that exchange request object. You always think about an object on which you will do something. And to make a proper object-oriented design, you will never exchange money. No, you will tell the request to exchange itself. You always invoke an object. So that is that decoupling. If you want to decouple from exchanges, when that day comes that you have different kinds of requests or whatever, you will put one I here and turn it into an interface. The compile the build will fail, you will follow the compiler and you will fix whatever it says and your code will work entirely. Right now I have 3 compile time errors. And I think that all 3 are in these 3 lines of code. So what is the request going to do? Now I arrive at the point where I need to go to the web, to download exchange rates, to convert them, to do all the dirty stuff, which is infrastructural. And now I say, I still don't want to go to the web. You request, go fetch from the rate server. I will feed you with whatever server you need. So you go and ask and give me the results. And now I say, listen, okay, let me complete the state of this is the exchange request. So I have just filled the state. Now, what will the fetch using accept? Now I say, now I know that this is going to the network, so this is an interface. I want to decouple entirely from whatever stands behind this point. And one line at a time, I have designed 4 or 5, I don't know, domain classes. I have decoupled from infrastructure. All the concepts have their names, which are going to remain the same eternally. I might change my mind, refactor stuff later, but these names will operate till the end of the while this application exists. So, the exchange rate server will accept. Now I need to show you this web. Okay, so you have to know what this web application is. It is simulating something. The point is that it is accepting a symbol of the currency from which to convert, to which currency to convert, and the date. So this is the web API I have. I'm not going to diverge from that too much. So my interface, which is wrapping that connection to the internet, is going to accept a date, money from which to convert, and money to and currency to which to convert, and it will return a domain object conversion. So I'm still deep within the domain. I'm not making any concessions there. And now I can define an object which implements that interface. So I need to think of something. You know that you never should write anything like HTTP request.open or create or whatever. You never do that. That's always somebody else's problem. You make a proxy. So the proxy is going to hide all that nasty set of details from me. So another domain concept is in. Let's make a proxy. It is implementing this interface. I will show you the way, one very specific technique, how you can write a class, an entire class. First, try to have one constructor, try to have one public method per class. If you have that, then everything the class is doing is delegating to itself several times with lower and lower level of detail. And once you get to the bottom of the call, there will be primitive types, there will be URLs, stuff like that, and the dirty work will happen there, and the class will boil down to one very simple function, which is doing its job. So, try fetch. A conversion means to try fetch an exchange rate for these parameters. I'm going to define that. It will return a decimal, but it is private. You never work with primitive types publicly, only privately. Okay. Once I have an exchange rate, a possible exchange rate, it might be empty because something failed or there is no exchange rate for the date or for the currency. Once I do have that, whatever it is, I will construct a conversion based on that. So conversion will be on this date from this amount of money, and the result will be the initial amount multiplied by the rate and the final currency. So that is the definition of money exchange. So I'm done. You see, the public method is over. I'm not going to change it. I'm only going to implement the inner parts. Okay, fetching the rate. It means that I have to fetch the textual content from the web. This is it. I'm going to fetch a string from the web. And then if it parses to decimal, then it will be the rate. Otherwise, if it fails or it is empty or anything happens, it will be no rate available. You see how I'm pushing the content deeper with every indirection. I'm doing a deeper, more detailed request, more detailed operation, which nobody else wants to know about. Nobody knows that this is happening. Everything is private in this class. Now, fetching content from the web means that I have to protect from exceptions. Nobody will have to protect from exceptions. There are no exceptions in this application anywhere. I will do that and say there is no exchange rate for whatever you asked for whatever reason. I'm still not analyzing the errors. I don't care. Then, once I'm relieved from having to think about errors, I'm going to open the stream and read the content of whatever came from the network. What is that? That is something that is the result of getting a stream from the web. It means to create. Now, there is that create HTTP request. Now, I will have to think about what is the URL. Now I will get response stream from that. Nobody else knows that this is happening. This is private function. And then I have to construct the URL, which is the base URL /rate/ from symbol to symbol and the date. And this is the complete request class, which tells me that I need the base URL. Since I have no clue what that is, I will ask it for the constructor. Constructor is invoked here. This will be fetched from some configuration, not hard-coded, probably. And so you have the application, you see. This is the configuration of the application until I get the server. This is the domain part, and this is the presentation part. And everything came out one line at a time. There's only one part of application missing. That is this execution of the request. And I will write it in the very same way as I did that prior class. Since my request is covering a range of dates and a range of currencies, and the web server is only working on one date, one currency, I will have to map all the dates. So I have a sequence of dates. I will have to match dates with the target currency. So I will have a sequence of date plus currency. And once I do that, I will fetch each of them from the server. And this is the complete class. So you see, I was able to write the entire program, which is going to the web, parsing the response, formatting the output to the view. If I run it, we will wait for the web. All right, and now we have the results. What do we say about this? Do you want to write code like this way? Or you want to have the whole requirement, 50 things in red all over the place, trying to plug all the compile errors, making bugs all the way, correcting bugs for another 2 days. Okay, I had 3 mistakes while I was writing this. Do you know, can anyone tell where? What do you think? Don't be afraid, just say anything. Where do you think that I made a mistake? Anyone? Okay, nobody's going to laugh at you. Try to guess. Where did I make a mistake? Nobody. Okay, it is not the request, it is not that part which went to the web, it is not this proxy, it is not formatting. No, it is formatting. One mistake was to use small letters M, which means minutes, not months, when formatting the date. I always do that. Another was that I used concat instead of join. I forgot the name of the method. The third mistake was that I forgot to add this rate /rate, so I pointed to the wrong URL. If you closely observe all these three mistakes, you will see that all three have happened on strings. In other words, never use strings. I rarely ever make any mistake in logic, because I'm always splitting the logic into tiniest bits, into one single line of code. Even I have the whole regions of applications which are not covered by tests, because the test would be identical to code, and I don't write them. It's not funny. Are you crying or laughing? I do write acceptance tests, end-to-end tests, because it happens that I misconfigure the application, that I'm pointing to wrong implementations. That happens. That is the configuration problem. I rarely ever make problems in logic unless I misunderstand what I was asked to do. If you write code with these principles in mind, you will also never make a mistake, because there is that joke. What are you doing? I'm removing bugs from code. So why did you put them in? You don't put bugs in. That is the point of programming. Okay, this was all I wanted to show you. You will have the code and the recording available. You can ask the questions now.
Do you ever refactor, or when comes to refactoring?
Do I ever refactor? I refactor all the time. Since actual applications are going to be much more complicated than this, introducing every single element to the design will ask for refactoring. But those refactorings are not painful. They are very simple when you do them all the time.
Another question. When you work in a larger, doesn't work anyway. When you work in the larger team, do you find issues with, let's just say, maybe once you wrote the code, you understand it much, much better, and when a new person comes in, do you have troubles maintaining the code or extending the code, or maybe if they have a different style of writing code, do you have conflicts? How do you work in a team with
Yes.
such men?
I have just arrived from a security conference, and yesterday I have learned a term, a name for that, which comes from security. If basic infrastructure is attacked by hackers, then you are allowed to use kinetic force. So when somebody makes mess in the team's code, you use kinetic force on him. No, you simply do not make concessions on that. You don't allow mess into the project. And, I'm not always this nice. You don't want to know. But it can be done. It is a matter of team culture. If you think all the time about that, many people apply this without understanding it, and then the design is terrible. But if you always refactor together, if you always sit together, talk, people learn. The last time I was leading a team, it took 2 years to reach that stage. And then they came to me, because I just left them, and they came back 6 months later and said, "This is good. It works."
So basically, this is just like a request-driven development. We are overriding. We're not using tests, for example, like if we would in test-driven development. We are just trying to push incrementally.
Deeper into the domain, into more complicated stuff, you would have to test it. You have to cover deep logic with tests. So I'm not against tests. I'm not telling you. But I mean, all this infrastructure, which makes 80% of code, contains no logic. It is just connectors to the logic. Yeah. So I do use TDD a lot, but I also have projects which are not covered with tests at all. No tests. Small MVPs. If you write it this way, you will never have a need to fix anything. Okay, the time is up. If you want to, I will be around. You can catch me anytime and we'll talk.